This is Barnaby Joyce, former Deputy Prime Minister, former Nationals leader, former Deputy Prime Minister again, and possibly the only Australian politician whose Wikipedia page should come with a breathalyzer. But after 20 years of scandals, resignations, citizenship problems, questionable decisions, and spectacular public appearances, Barnaby keeps coming back. How the fuck does he do it? Barnaby built his political identity as the bloke from the bush. Straight talking, no nonsense, country values. Essentially, he's your uncle at Christmas lunch, except somebody accidentally gave him control of a federal department. And this is where the Barnaby Joyce story becomes extraordinary. Because most politicians get one career-ending scandal, Barnaby appears to collect them. In August 2017, Australia was in the middle of what became known as the dual citizenship crisis. Politicians were suddenly discovering that, constitutionally speaking, some of them weren't quite as Australian as they'd assumed. And then it reached the Deputy Prime Minister. Barnaby Joyce announced he'd been contacted by the New Zealand High Commission and told he might be a New Zealand citizen, which apparently came as something of a surprise to Barnaby Joyce, the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia. Barnaby was born in Tamworth, but his father was born in New Zealand, which meant Barnaby had inherited New Zealand citizenship by descent without apparently knowing it. So for a brief, glorious moment, Australia's Deputy Prime Minister was essentially an undocumented New Zealander. He'd somehow risen all the way to Deputy Prime Minister before discovering he'd unlocked an entire second nationality. New Zealand eventually made us keep him. Relations between the two countries have never fully recovered. Unfortunately, the Australian Constitution was less accommodating. Section 44 prohibits a citizen of a foreign power from being chosen for Parliament. And on October 27th, the High Court unanimously found Joyce had been a New Zealand citizen when he nominated for the 2016 election, meaning his election was invalid. And that looked like the end of Barnaby Joyce. For approximately 5 weeks. Because Barnaby had already renounced his New Zealand citizenship, contested the New England by-election on December 2nd, and came roaring back. Remember this bit, because Barnaby Joyce's greatest political ability isn't getting into trouble, it's coming back afterwards, and we're going to be seeing quite a lot of that. Now, while Barnaby was busy trying to win his seat back after accidentally becoming a New Zealander, he took a little break from campaigning and headed to Canberra for the inaugural National Agriculture Day dinner. And that's where Australia's richest woman, Gina Rinehart, decided Barnaby deserved a prize. Not a plaque, not a bottle of wine, not even a Bunnings voucher. $40,000 for being a champion of agriculture. Because nothing says man of the people quite like Australia's richest billionaire handing you 40 grand at a gala dinner. Barnaby later said he had absolutely no warning this was going to happen, which is believable. And initially, Barnaby seemed pretty keen. Asked what he'd do with the money, he talked about things he could do on his own farm, which was when somebody apparently discovered the button marked optics, because there was a slight problem. Barnaby Joyce was a senior politician fighting to return to Parliament. And Gina Rinehart wasn't just a random woman wandering around Canberra with novelty cheques. She was one of Australia's most powerful business figures, with major interests in mining and agriculture, and had previously supported Barnaby politically. The opposition went ballistic. The National Farmers Federation distanced itself from the award. And by the following day, Barnaby declined the 40 grand. He later insisted he'd been completely blindsided by the whole thing. And frankly, his explanation may be the greatest defence Barnaby Joyce has ever produced. But to his credit, the money went back. Just a completely normal evening in Australian democracy where a billionaire handed a politician a novelty cheque. In 2017, while Barnaby Joyce was the minister responsible for water, the federal government purchased 28.7 gigalitres of overland flow water entitlements from a company called Eastern Australia Agriculture. The price tag? $78.9 million. And the seller, Eastern Australia Agriculture, wasn't exactly unhappy with the arrangement. The company subsequently recorded a gain of around $52 million on the sale. That's quite a day at the office, but then the story got even more Australian. EAA's ultimate holding company at the time was domiciled, in the Cayman Islands, because apparently the natural habitat of Australian floodwater is the Caribbean. And here's where we need to be precise. Angus Taylor had previously been involved with EAA before entering Parliament. Taylor has said he had severed his involvement before becoming an MP, had no interest in the company or related companies, received no benefit from the buyback, and played no part in the transaction. So we're not saying Angus Taylor pocketed the money. We're saying Australian taxpayers spent nearly $80 million on low reliability overland flow water entitlements from a company whose corporate structure included a Cayman Islands parent, which is already sufficiently fucking weird. When the deal later became a political controversy, Barnaby said the transaction had been negotiated at arm's length and defended the purchase. So was it illegal? That's not what we're saying. Was it controversial? Nope, of course not. And somehow, we're still nowhere near finished with Barnaby Joyce. And after surviving the citizenship saga, Barnaby returned to Canberra as Deputy Prime Minister. Everything was back to normal for about 5 minutes. Because in early 2018, revelations emerged that Barnaby had been having a relationship with his former media advisor, Vicky Campion, and suddenly Canberra completely lost its shit. But politically, the story quickly became about much more than Barnaby's private life. Questions were being asked about Campion's employment after leaving Joyce's office, including subsequent jobs in the offices of other Nationals MPs. Then came questions about Barnaby's living arrangements, questions about ministerial standards, questions about who knew what. And eventually, Malcolm Turnbull found himself explaining to the nation that ministers really shouldn't be sleeping with their staff. Yes, Australian politics had become so comprehensively Barnabied that we needed a new rule. Then another separate allegation emerged. A sexual harassment complaint was made against Joyce, which he denied. The Nationals later investigated and said it was unable to make a determination. But by now, the political pressure was enormous. On February 23rd, 2018, Barnaby Joyce finally announced he was stepping down as Nationals leader and Deputy Prime Minister. And that appeared to be the end of Barnaby Joyce.
I will step down as the leader of the National Party and Deputy Prime Minister of Australia.
Nope, of course not. June 2021, the Nationals dump Michael McCormack, and guess who's standing behind the door? Barnaby challenges for the leadership. Barnaby wins. Barnaby becomes Deputy Prime Minister. Again, he's back. At this point, Australia should probably have realised you don't end Barnaby Joyce's political career. You merely inconvenience it. Now, you can't tell the story of Barnaby Joyce without discussing one of Australia's oldest political traditions, the pork barrel. For international viewers, pork barrelling is when governments spend public money in places where that spending might also be politically convenient, or as politicians prefer to call it, and one particularly interesting example was the Building Better Regions Fund, a massive grants program designed to fund infrastructure and community projects across regional Australia. Sounds reasonable. Regional Australia needs infrastructure. Then the Auditor-General looked at how the money was actually handed out. Across the first 5 rounds, $1.15 billion was awarded to almost 1,300 projects. But the audit found something curious. 65% of infrastructure projects that received funding were not the projects assessed as the most meritorious. 65%. Apparently, Building Better Regions had a silent second line, terms and conditions apply, and when the Auditor-General compared where the money went with where it would have gone if the merit assessments had been followed, Nationals held electorates received approximately $104 million more. That's 29% more than the merit assessment results would have produced. Meanwhile, Liberal electorates received about $73.5 million less, Labor electorates about $26 million less, and electorates held by everyone else, also less. It's an extraordinary coincidence. And by round 5, guess who was chairing the ministerial panel making the funding decisions? Barnaby fucking Joyce. That round distributed roughly $300 million. When Labor accused the program of pork barrelling, Barnaby's response was nuanced, measured, statesmanlike. Now, to be precise, the Auditor-General didn't conclude that Barnaby personally stole money or that these regional projects were worthless. What it did find was that funding decisions weren't appropriately informed by departmental advice, that many decisions weren't properly documented, and that ministers increasingly departed from the published merit assessments. So I'm not saying Barnaby had a pork barrel, I'm saying the Auditor-General found a statistically fascinating amount of bacon. And Barnaby apparently didn't care.
My best bitches!
And then in February 2024, Australia received perhaps the purest Barnaby Joyce moment ever captured on film. It was late. Parliament had finished sitting. Barnaby was walking back to his accommodation through Braddon in Canberra. And then this happened. That's a former Deputy Prime Minister of Australia on a footpath having an extremely important bilateral discussion with a planter box. And look, before everyone gets too excited, there actually was an explanation.
I'm on a prescription drug, and they say certain things may happen to you if you drink.
Fair enough. Medication and alcohol can be a very bad combination. But unfortunately for Barnaby, cameras and footpaths are an even worse one. And somehow the story became even more Australian. Because after the footage went viral, someone drew a fucking chalk outline around where he'd been lying.
Everything fades away.
So after all of that, there's one question we probably need to answer. How the fuck does Barnaby Joyce keep surviving? Because by normal political standards, Barnaby's career should have ended approximately 6 careers ago. citizenship crisis, resignation, leadership defeat, water controversy, pork barrelling controversy, footpath, and yet he keeps coming back. And there is actually a reason for that. For a significant chunk of regional Australia, Barnaby doesn't look like a malfunctioning politician. He looks like someone who actually belongs there. He's loud, he's argumentative, he's occasionally chaotic. He says things polished politicians wouldn't dream of saying. And while Canberra sees that as a liability, some voters see it as authenticity. Barnaby doesn't look like somebody who's been assembled by a focus group. He looks like somebody who wandered into the focus group, argued with everyone, drank their coffee, and somehow became Deputy Prime Minister. Twice.